The sound of the train slicing through the night was the kind that stayed in your bones long after it passed. The kind that didn't just echo. It lingered, like the ghost of something you weren't ready to lose. Jamie stood on the edge of the platform, fingers gripping the frayed strap of his backpack, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The cold wind wrapped around him, sharp and merciless, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache pressing against his ribs. Austin was leaving. No, Austin had to leave. The words still felt unreal. They had met in late spring, on a rooftop party overlooking the city, when laughter mixed with music and youth felt endless. Austin had walked up to him with that half-smile that seemed to dare the world to stop him. "You look like you could use a better view," he'd said, and from that moment, Jamie's life had never been the same. Austin was all movement and light, the kind of person who turned ordinary nights into something cinematic. Jamie was quieter, the observer, always the one capturing moments in his sketchbook rather than living them. But Austin drew him out of his silence, out of his shadows. They didn't mean to fall in love. It just happened. In the late-night coffee runs, the shared earphones, the quiet mornings tangled in bedsheets when the world still slept. Austin would run his fingers through Jamie's hair and whisper things like, "You make the world feel less temporary." But everything was temporary, especially Austin. When he got accepted into a music conservatory across the country, it was supposed to be good news. It was good news, except for the part where it meant leaving Jamie behind. They tried to pretend it didn't matter. They didn't talk about the distance, or the way the word goodbye hovered between them like a loaded weapon. But time has a cruel way of catching up, and tonight, under the silver glow of the station lights, there was no escaping it anymore. Austin's train would leave at midnight. Jamie checked the clock. 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes left. 6 minutes before silence. Austin turned toward him, eyes soft but tired. "You're not saying anything," he said, voice low. Jamie swallowed. "What's there to say?" Austin gave a small laugh, one that cracked halfway through. "You could tell me not to go." "I could," Jamie said, staring at the ground. "But you'd still go." The space between them tightened, charged with the kind of stillness that hurt. Austin stepped closer, close enough for Jamie to feel his warmth against the cold air. "You know," Austin whispered, "I always thought you'd be the one to leave first." Jamie looked up, confused. "Why would you think that?" "Because you have that look," Austin said. "Like you're already halfway gone. Like your heart belongs somewhere far away." Jamie's throat tightened. "It belongs here." Austin smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'm lucky it found me." The train's horn cried out in the distance, low and haunting. Austin exhaled, the sound trembling through the space between them. "I hate this part," he murmured. Jamie didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded, his hands clenched in the pockets of his jacket. Austin reached forward, his fingers brushing the collar of Jamie's coat. "This jacket," he said softly. "You always wear it when it's cold. You gave it to me." "I know. That's why I like it." Jamie tried to smile but couldn't. Instead, he pulled Austin into a hug, fierce, desperate, trembling. The scent of him, cedarwood and rain, filled Jamie's lungs, pressed into his skin, burned into his memory. Austin's arms tightened around him, his heartbeat hammering fast against Jamie's chest. "Promise me something," Austin whispered. "Anything. Don't stop painting. Don't stop seeing beauty in things, even when it hurts." Jamie let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "You think I'll stop because of you?" Austin laughed again, quiet and fragile. "No, I think you'll keep going because of me." The loudspeaker announced the train's arrival. Time fractured. Austin pulled back slowly, eyes glistening under the dim lights. He pressed a kiss against Jamie's forehead, soft, lingering. The kind of kiss that carried 1,000 unsaid things. "I'll write to you," Austin said. Jamie nodded, his voice breaking. "I'll wait." And then Austin stepped back. One step, then another. Jamie's heart screamed with every inch of distance. When Austin turned toward the train doors, Jamie caught his hand one last time. Austin! Austin froze. Jamie's voice was barely a whisper. Don't forget me. Austin's eyes met his, burning with everything they couldn't say. Never. Then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd, by the light, by the night. The train roared to life, metal grinding against metal. Jamie stood there, unmoving, watching as the last car disappeared into the darkness. The echo of it left a hollow ache in the air. He didn't realize he was crying until the tears reached his lips, salt and cold and real. When he finally looked down, he saw the jacket clutched in his hands. Austin's scent lingered, faint but unmistakable. He pressed it against his face and closed his eyes. The world felt impossibly still. He could almost hear Austin's laughter in the distance, like a song fading into memory. Jamie turned toward the empty tracks, his reflection ghosted in the glass of the departing train. The night seemed endless, but in that endlessness was something else, something fragile, something beautiful. Love hadn't left, it had only changed form. It lived in the jacket, in the scent, in the ache that refused to fade. Because love, Jamie realized, wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about remembering, and letting the echo of someone's warmth guide you through the cold. And as the wind swept through the station, carrying the last whispers of Austin's scent, Jamie smiled faintly for the first time that night. The train had carried him away, but it hadn't taken everything. It had left behind something invisible, something eternal. Something that would stay. The morning after Austin left, the world looked the same, cruelly so. The sun still rose behind the same cracked blinds, the city still hummed, cars still passed. But everything felt distant, muffled, like Jamie was living inside glass. He made coffee and forgot to drink it. He sat on the edge of the bed where Austin used to sit to tie his shoes. The sheets still carried a trace of him, that scent of cedarwood and rain, faint now but stubborn. Jamie pressed his face into it until the smell faded completely. He told himself he would get up. He didn't. Days folded into each other like damp pages in a forgotten book. He went to class, nodded when people spoke, pretended to listen. His art professor, a wiry woman with kind eyes, pulled him aside after 2 weeks. "You haven't turned in your latest project," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" Jamie blinked. The question hung in the air too long. "Yeah," he finally said, "just uninspired." It was a lie. Inspiration was all he had, it just hurt too much to use it. Every blank canvas looked like a battlefield. Every brushstroke felt like betrayal. One evening, he found himself standing in front of the easel again. It was raining outside, and the sound of it against the window sounded like static, like the noise between memories. He picked up a brush, dipped it into gray, and started painting without thinking. Hours passed unnoticed. When he stepped back, he saw a figure. Alone on a train platform, light spilling from a departing train, face obscured by the blur of motion. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even finished. But it was real. He named it Departure. He submitted it for a student exhibition a week later. When the piece was displayed, people stood in front of it longer than usual. Some tilted their heads, whispering. Others just stared. One girl came up to him afterward, eyes glassy. "That painting," she said. "It feels like missing someone you can't stop loving." Jamie nodded, unable to speak. That night, he walked home under a soft drizzle and realized that maybe pain wasn't something to escape. Maybe it was something to shape. Still, nights were hardest. He tried not to check his phone, but habit betrayed him. The last text from Austin was 3 days old. Boarding now. Talk soon. There had been no talk soon. For a while, Jamie convinced himself Austin was just busy. New city, new people, new life. But silence has a way of growing heavy. It starts as a space between messages, then a day, then a week, until suddenly it becomes part of your world. He didn't delete their photos. He couldn't. The one on the rooftop stayed as his wallpaper. Austin grinning with hair tousled by the wind, sunlight spilling across his face. That smile had once felt like home. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Jamie received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, looping, confident, slightly messy. His pulse quickened as he tore it open. Jamie, it began. I don't know how to start this. I thought leaving would be easy if I convinced myself it was temporary. But it's not. Everything here is fast and loud and brilliant, and all I can think about is how you used to make silence feel safe. I've been writing songs, they all sound like you. I miss you more than I thought possible. I'm sorry I left. But maybe this distance is something we need. Maybe love isn't about being in the same place, but becoming the kind of people who can find each other again. It ended simply, still yours. Austin. Jamie sat there for a long time, staring at the page. He didn't cry. He just felt something loosen inside him. Not healing, not yet, but release. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his sketchbook, and carried it everywhere for months. Winter came. Snow fell in gentle, uneven layers, covering the streets in a quiet that felt both comforting and cruel. Jamie found work at a small art gallery downtown, sweeping floors, arranging displays, sometimes sketching customers when the owner wasn't watching. It wasn't much, but it gave him rhythm. One afternoon, as he was rearranging frames, a man paused in front of departure. He studied it for a long time before turning to Jamie. Did you paint this? Jamie hesitated. Yeah. The man smiled. It's beautiful. Sad, but beautiful. Jamie nodded, unsure what to say. Loss looks good on canvas. The man continued, but it's hell in real life. That night, Jamie thought about those words. He realized he'd built his world out of memories, and memories, no matter how sacred, can become cages. He went home and opened his sketchbook. Page after page of Austin's face stared back at him. Sleeping, laughing, looking out a window. Jamie stared at the drawings, then slowly, quietly, closed the book. He didn't throw it away. He just put it on the highest shelf. By spring, something had changed. Jamie still missed Austin, but the missing didn't burn anymore. Pulsed, steady, manageable, familiar. He painted more. His new work wasn't about loss. It was about motion, about the way light touches things in passing. One evening, while cleaning up after a class, his professor approached him again. You're showing growth, she said. This new series, it feels alive. Jamie smiled faintly. Maybe I'm learning how to be. Months later, the gallery hosted another exhibition, this time his solo show. He called it Echoes of You. The collection told a quiet story. Beginnings, separations, returnings, not literal, but emotional. Each piece held traces of Austin, yet none were about him directly. They were about Jamie himself, who he was becoming. When the night of the opening arrived, the gallery buzzed with chatter. People pointed, smiled, whispered. Jamie drifted through the crowd like a ghost, polite and grateful, but detached, until he heard a familiar voice behind him. Still using too much gray, the voice said. Jamie froze. He turned slowly. Austin stood there, older somehow, hair a bit longer, wearing the same leather jacket that once hung over Jamie's chair. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Austin smiled, small and hesitant. Hey! Jamie's breath caught. You're here. Yeah. Austin said softly. I had to see it. A friend sent me an article about this show. Said the artist's work felt like heartbreak turned into light. I knew it was you. Jamie's chest tightened. You could have written. I did, Austin said quietly. A few times. Maybe the letters never reached you. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything time hadn't erased. Jamie finally said, You look good. So do you, Austin replied. Better, actually. They both laughed. Awkward, genuine. Austin glanced at the largest painting on the wall. A vast canvas of color and motion. No figures, just light. This one, he said. It feels like hope. Jamie nodded. It's called After the Train. Austin looked at him, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You never stopped painting. I couldn't, Jamie said. You told me not to. Austin smiled, but it was tinged with something else. Regret, maybe, or gratitude. I'm glad you listened. For a while, they just stood there, surrounded by people who didn't know their story, didn't know that the air between them was history itself. Austin finally broke the silence. I don't know what I expected coming here, he said. Maybe I just wanted to see if the world I left behind still existed. Jamie looked down. And Austin's voice softened. It does. But it doesn't need me anymore. The words hit Jamie harder than he expected. He wanted to say you're wrong. He wanted to reach out, to pull Austin back into the space they once shared. But he didn't. He just nodded. Maybe that's what love does, Jamie said finally. It changes shape. It doesn't end. It just becomes something else. Austin smiled. Yeah, I think so too. They stood in silence again. Not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that settles, gentle and complete. When Austin finally turned to leave, he paused at the door. Jamie. Jamie looked up. I'm proud of you, Austin said. Truly. And then he was gone like before. But this time it didn't feel like loss. Felt like closure. That night, when the gallery emptied and the lights dimmed, Jamie walked up to After the Train. He studied it under the faint glow of the exit sign. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, alive, full of movement and color. It was everything he had become. He took off his jacket, the same one that still faintly carried Austin's scent after all this time, and draped it over the back of a chair. For the first time, he didn't cling to it. He just let it rest there, a relic of something beautiful, something finished. Outside, the city lights shimmered on wet pavement, reflections stretching endlessly. Somewhere, far away, another train passed through the night, its whistle soft and fading. Jamie smiled. He didn't chase the sound. He didn't need to. Because love, he realized, had never left. It was in the canvas, in the motion, in the quiet peace that now filled the spaces where pain once lived. And as he turned off the lights and stepped into the cool night, he breathed deeply, and for the first time in a long time, the air smelled only of rain. The train doors slid shut behind me, sealing in the sound of Jamie's voice, or maybe I only imagined it, echoing somewhere in the blur of metal and air. I found a seat by the window and stared out as the platform began to move. No, that wasn't right. I was moving. The world outside was staying still. Jamie stood there on the platform, small against the stretch of empty tracks, the collar of his jacket lifted against the wind. I kept my eyes on him until he was nothing more than a shape swallowed by darkness. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that leaving meant becoming who I was supposed to be, that love, real love, would survive the distance. But even as the city lights disappeared behind me, a part of me knew I was lying. The train rocked gently, a slow rhythm that should have been comforting, but I couldn't breathe. Every sound felt too sharp, the hum of the wheels, the soft murmurs of strangers, the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights above. Jamie's scent was still on my hands. cedarwood and paint. The smell of our apartment, of nights spent talking until dawn, of coffee gone cold between conversations. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass and closed my eyes. When the train slowed at the next station, a couple across the aisle got off, holding hands, laughing softly. The woman rested her head on the man's shoulder as they stepped onto the platform. For a second, something inside me cracked. I wanted to run back. I almost did. But then the train lurched forward again, and I stayed seated, letting the momentum make the choice I couldn't. Weeks turned into months. The conservatory was everything I thought I wanted. The city buzzed with sound, students rehearsing in every corner, streets alive with rhythm and noise. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like static. Music used to come easily to me. Now every note sounded hollow. I'd sit in front of the piano for hours, pressing keys that refused to mean anything. My professor said I had talent, but talent felt useless when the thing that made it alive was gone. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint hum of trains passing through the city. Every sound brought me back to that night. Every echo sounded like Jamie's voice saying my name one last time. I started writing letters, dozens of them, some short, some pages long. I told him about classes, about how my hands shook when I played, about how the mornings here smelled like rain and coffee and the kind of loneliness that doesn't fade. I mailed a few. Most I didn't. Somewhere deep down, I think I was afraid that he'd moved on, that my words would arrive in a place where I no longer belonged. Then one afternoon, I found something in the practice room that stopped me cold. Someone had pinned a poster for a local student art exhibition to the wall, Departure by Jamie Ward. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my pulse racing. I stared at the poster until the world blurred. He'd kept painting. And he'd painted that night. I didn't go to see it in person. Couldn't. I was terrified that if I did, I'd fall apart. But I clipped the poster and folded it carefully into my notebook. It stayed there for years, worn at the edges, folded and refolded until the ink began to fade. Time has a way of sanding down the edges of grief. By the second year, I'd stopped waking up at 3 a.m. reaching for a ghost. By the third, I could say his name without breaking. But he was still there, in the way I played certain chords, in the way silence sat between songs. He changed the way I heard the world. I wrote an album called Echo Line. Every track was a fragment of memory. Laughter in the kitchen, footsteps on the stairs, a train fading into distance. People said it sounded nostalgic, melancholic even. No one knew it was him. For years later, I saw his name again. This time in an article, young artist Jamie Ward explores the beauty of transience in solo exhibition, Echoes of You. The title hit like a lightning strike. I read every word, every line describing the collection, the way his art had evolved. They called his work a quiet storm of tenderness and loss. They said his pieces felt like love turned into light. And I knew before I even decided that I had to go. When I walked into that gallery, the world fell silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that empties things. It was full, sacred. The walls were lined with pieces that felt like déjà vu, brushstrokes that echoed our past, colors that looked like the glow of the train station that night. And then I saw him. Jamie. He stood near the back of the room, surrounded by strangers, talking softly, smiling in that quiet way that always made you want to listen. He looked different, older, steadier. But it was him. Every line of his face carried a story I already knew by heart. When he turned and saw me, for a moment the world stopped moving. And in that stillness, I realized something I'd never understood before. I hadn't left to become someone better. I'd left to learn what love becomes when it's not being held. Later that night, after we talked, after the small smiles and awkward pauses and the strange comfort of standing in the same space again, I walked out into the cold city air and didn't feel empty. For the first time in years, I felt light. Because the truth is, love doesn't always ask to be rekindled. Sometimes it just wants to be seen, to know it mattered. That night, I found a quiet cafe by the station and sat by the window. Trains came and went. People left, people arrived. I opened my notebook and began to write again. The words came easily this time. Jamie, if you're reading this, it means I finally found peace in the places I once feared. You taught me that love doesn't vanish. It changes, grows, lingers in the things we create. You painted light out of loss. I wrote songs out of silence. Maybe that's how we stay connected. You once told me I made the world feel less temporary. I think you were wrong. The world is still temporary, but what we leave behind, that isn't. Thank you for staying in my story, even when we weren't in each other's lives. Always, Austin. He never sent that letter either. He just folded it neatly, placed it in the same notebook as the faded poster of departure, and left it there, a quiet monument to something that had already found its ending. The next morning, as he boarded another train, not to escape, but simply to go forward, he looked out the window and smiled. Somewhere out there, Jamie was probably painting the same morning light that now touched his face. And though they were in different cities, their worlds felt connected again, by the faint hum of the rails, the echo of memory, and the invisible thread of love that had never really broken. The train began to move, carrying him into another chapter. This time, Austin didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because he knew that even as the world passed by, a part of him, the best part, would always remain on that midnight platform, held in the scent of a jacket, in the echo of a goodbye that had turned, finally, into peace.